This message has no affiliation with the Department of War. Good evening, everyone. Stick with us today as we go over the hot issue that is the Second Amendment, the reopening of the government, and stay with us all the way until the end as I answer one of your questions. This is the Martin Memo. The Martin Memo. Well, before we begin, I just want to wrap up what was an extraordinary week. Again, here at the Martin Memo, we finally received our first merch items. We were also able to get all the way up to 345 subscribers as of 10 minutes ago. So amazing feats, and we're just getting started. This movement is only growing, and it's thanks to people like you out there supporting. I also want to highlight my Freedom shirt. I thought that was very fitting as we dive into the Second Amendment today and also remember Charlie Kirk's legacy that he played for conservative media. And then additionally, today I gave my informative speech in public speaking class, and that was just such a fun time. I was able to really dive into the three branches of government and how they check and balance each other out. So it was truly a great class, a great time, and we are only getting started. So with that being said, so picture this. It is 1786. Out in Massachusetts, a war veteran named Daniel Shays, broke and furious, decides he's had enough. Taxes are crushing farmers and courts are seizing the land. He rallies 1,500 men armed with muskets and pitchforks marching on the armory. They ultimately lose, but the uprising terrifies the fledgling government. James Madison thinks we might need a plan B, while George Washington fumes in anger, referring to the infamous Shays Rebellion. So now we fast forward to 1787 and the constitutional conversation. The anti-federalists who despised big government raise alarms. You're building a federal army? Well, what if it turns against us? Their solution becomes the Bill of Rights with the Second Amendment as number 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Doesn't that give you goosebumps? What a great amendment that they laid out back then. Speaking of back then, well-regulated meant functional and ready, not banned unless the government approves. The militia referred to everyday people like you, myself, even your neighbor with a squirrel rifle, everyone. This wasn't about hunting ducks, however. It was a bold, don't tread on me declaration. And don't overlook the 14th Amendment in 1868 after the Civil War. Southern states were disarming freed black citizens, so Congress ensured the Second Amendment applied to the states as well. That's civil rights in action. The next time someone claims it's just for militias, remind them of Justice Joseph Story in 1833. The right to keep and bear arms is the palladium of liberty. In other words, your gun represents a vote against tyranny. And no, we're not living in tyranny right now, as a lot of people on the left try to spin it. We're not anywhere close to what tyranny is. The people posting saying we're living in tyranny clearly don't know what it even means, because they wouldn't even be allowed to post that. All right, moving on before I go down a deep rabbit hole. Let's go to the 1900s. For decades, courts treated the Second Amendment like that awkward uncle at Thanksgiving, acknowledged as family, but rarely discussed. Then in 2008, along comes Dick Heller, a security guard who wants a handgun in D.C. The city steps in and say, absolutely not, that's not allowed. But then the Supreme Court comes down and declares, yes. Justice Scalia delivers the 5-4 majority opinion. It is an individual right. You don't need to be in a militia to keep a Glock on your nightstand, as he wrote. 2 years later, in McDonald versus Chicago, the court affirms that this applies to the states too. No more outright city bans. And then in 2022, Buren challenges New York's rule requiring proof of being special for a carry permit, and the Supreme Court rejects it outright. Now, gun laws must align with historical traditions from 1791 or 1868, ending the May issue games. As a result, 29 states have adopted constitutional carry. With that all being said, there is the unfortunate flip side. I'm not too old to remember Uvalde, Parkland, Vegas, and even Buffalo. Each tragedy follows the same grim script. Horror unfolds, hashtags trend, politicians shed their crocodile tears on TV, and unfortunately nothing changes. Meanwhile, 40% of homes have a gun, and 60% of Americans want stricter laws. Now here's where I stand. And yes, I'm about to make both sides a little upset. So put the cards on the table. I support the Second Amendment. Not kinda, not sorta, not with an asterisk, but full stop. It's why we are free, why tyrants lose sleep, and why the Bill of Rights is one of the smartest documents ever created. But I'm tired of pretending that doing nothing is truly pro-Second Amendment. So here is my 3-pillar plan, which I call the Martin Middle Path. All right, now let's dive in. We're going to pillar 1, and that is red flag laws, which up until recently, I actually had the wrong impression on what red flag laws were. I had read online on some disinformation that my understanding of it was completely different of what was actually occurring. So first of all, I believe in red flag laws, but only if they are bulletproof. Let's be honest, if your brother texts about shooting up a mall and owns an AR-15 with a manifesto, we can't just wait for bodies to drop. Red flag laws allow a judge to temporarily remove that person's guns. 20 states have them, with Florida enacting theirs just 3 days after Parkland. However, the danger lies in ex parte orders. When you lose your guns before getting a say, maybe a vindictive ex, a nosy neighbor, or a biased judge, because they're all over as we have seen, I don't believe in that. My rule is no red flag without absolute proof, including screenshots, voicemails, maybe a psych evaluation, and witnesses under oath, plus a hearing within 48 hours. If it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, it does not happen. This isn't a gun grab. It is precise surgery, not amputation. Now moving on down to pillar 2, and that is universal background checks. This isn't infringement, it's responsible adulting. Now lastly, we move on to pillar 3, and that is a 72-hour waiting period. Here's one of the stats that haunts me. Over half of gun deaths are suicides, and most are impulsive. Studies show waiting periods cut gun homicides by 17% and suicides between 7 to 11%, with Johns Hopkins estimating hundreds, if not thousands, of lives saved annually. 72 hours isn't forever. It's a breath, a pause, a chance to sleep on it. You still get your gun, you just don't grab it at 2 a.m. after a breakup. Now, before we move on to the next segment, I just want to say that I am all for the Second Amendment. I have said that. I have guns all across the family. We are a big Second Amendment family, and I intend to carry on that legacy. I think there just needs to be a little better gun ownership across the board. We see too many instances where these shootings could have been prevented, as well as some of the suicides that unfortunately do happen. So I believe that we need to just tweak it a little bit, find a middle ground, find a compromise. Before we dive into objections, let's debunk a couple of common myths that keep muddying the waters in these debates. So the first myth: school shootings are always about deranged students targeting classmates in a packed classroom. Let's do a reality check there. The term school shooting is often broadly defined to include any firearm discharge on school property, no matter the circumstances. This could mean a suicide in an empty parking lot after hours, an accidental firing during a non-school event, gang-related violence unrelated to students, or even incidents targeting staff or custodians. Not all involve students as victims, and many aren't mass casualty horrors that dominate headlines. This wide net can inflate perceptions and distract from targeted prevention. Let's go into the second myth. Gun death statistics are mostly about murders, homicides, or mass shootings from criminals. Nope, not even close. As I've touched on, over half of all gun deaths, actually 58 to 62% of gun deaths, are suicides, which again ties into the issue of the mental health epidemic that is plaguing America. These myths distort the facts and fuel division, so let's cut through them and focus on what actually works. All right, now let's play objection bingo. Red flag laws violate due process. That is why I insist on proof and an appeal within 48 hours. You don't lose your rights on a hunch. That should never happen. That is not what the red flag laws were designed to do. Time and time again, we see this being abused by biased judges or people that have a vendetta against someone. I don't agree with that. There needs to be absolute proof before you take away someone's guns. Well, waiting periods inconvenience hunters. Well, then buy your deer rifle in June, not the day before the season starts, right? Plan ahead. To end the segment, here's the deal. I love the Second Amendment, freedom, history, and my family, and I refuse to choose between them. We won't fix this with bans or mere thoughts and prayers. We need smart, tough, fair rules. Red flags with ironclad proof, universal checks, and a 72-hour wait as a cooldown, not a lockout. This is not weakness. It is wisdom. The founders gave us a right. Now we must be good stewards of that right. All right, let's move on to the biggest news that got everyone breathing a sigh of relief, or maybe at least just catching their breath after holding it for way too long. This is a special segment on the government shutdown finally being over. Buckle up because we're diving into how we got here, what it means, and why it's a classic Washington circus that leaves us all paying the tab. Picture this. It's late 2024, and we're staring down another funding deadline. Democrats, like usual, want to resist everything that the Republican Party and President Trump do and want more aid for their social program BS. But now let's fast forward 43 days. Yes, you heard it. 43 days. It was the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Federal workers go without paychecks. National parks turn into trash. Food assistance programs grind to a halt, and even Navy shipbuilding hits a snag. Now we are talking about real pain. 800,000 furloughed employees, delayed tax refunds, and airports on the brink with understaffed TSA lines. But yesterday, November 12th, 2025, the drama ends. The House votes overwhelmingly to pass a stopgap bill. The Senate gives it the green light, and President Trump signs it into law late Wednesday night. This continuing resolution funds the government through January 30th, 2026, kicking the can down the road, but at least we are reopening the doors. Now, it includes $1 billion for Navy shipbuilding. It restarts the disrupted programs like SNAP benefits for millions, which of course is a big win, and it's just enough compromise to get us through the holidays. Now, here's where I stand on this issue. It took long enough. I'm very thankful that the Democrats finally came to their senses, and at least we had 8 Democrats go across the aisle and say enough is enough. I think it's hilarious how they're saying this is the Republican shutdown and Republicans are to blame for this, but then they do interviews where it's saying we were trying to inflict the most pain on the American people, or like we really tried to make Republicans look like the bad guy and hold it up, and all these different things, but yet the government is finally open. We can all breathe just a little bit better, especially if you're in the military like myself. We are thankful that the bipartisanship finally came through, and now we will be getting a solid, for sure, paycheck, at least for the next few months. That's the shutdown saga, all wrapped up into a nutshell. Government is reopened, crisis is averted, and now my favorite part of the show, the cold monologue. For those of you who do not know what the cold monologue is, you ask us questions throughout the week via our social media, YouTube, whatever it may be. My editor-in-chief, she writes them down, puts it on slips of paper, and puts it in this hat. I have no prior knowledge on what is being asked. You are getting my pure, authentic reaction. So, with that being said, what are your thoughts on the Supreme Court not revisiting Obergefell versus Hodges? I believe this was the right call. I had seen speculation that they were potentially going to reopen the case and reevaluate it. I don't think they needed to do all of that. Are there a couple things in there that I would probably tweak? Of course I would. But overall, Obergefell versus Hodges is a solid court ruling, and I think it would be stupid and fallout would occur all across the country if you ended up revoking Obergefell versus Hodges. Now, whether you agree with it on a spiritual level or not, that is kind of your own prerogative. But from what I see, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. A good buddy of mine, Matt Melvin, who joined the show not too long ago, he said, that's between me and God on what happens in the bedroom, and I would agree with that. I don't agree with it. I don't believe in the whole LGBTQ movement, right? That is not for me. However, I'm still going to love and support thy neighbor nonetheless. So overall, as far as Obergefell versus Hodges, the court did the right thing. I'm glad they did not reopen it. That would have been a terrible, terrible, stupid decision. So good on the Supreme Court for not revisiting that case. All right. With that all being said, well, folks, that's all we have in store for today. Join us on Monday. That's right, Monday, as we go live for the first time on YouTube, where we answer any of the questions that you may have, participate in civil debates, and just have fun regardless. That is going to occur at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube Live, The Martin Memo. Share your thoughts on X. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Martin Memo. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Now, in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. This is The Martin Memo.